The Chimera Protocol. Chapter 1. The Perfect Echo. For the first year after David's mission went silent, Chloe's world was a great-scale photograph of what it once had been. He was gone, a hero lost to the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space. She existed in a state of suspended grief, surrounded by his things, his favorite worn sweater, his collection of old sci-fi novels, the lingering scent of his aftershave on a pillow. Then came the offer from a company she'd never heard of, Athelred Technologies. It was a proposition that sounded like it had been lifted from one of David's novels. They spoke of a program called the Chimera Protocol, an experimental technology that could rebuild a human consciousness from a person's complete digital footprint and implant it into a biosynthetic body, a clone. They told her David had been a secret participant, a prime candidate due to his extensive neurological mapping as an astronaut. They could bring him back. Not a ghost, not a memory, but him. Chloe, desperate and half-mad with grief, signed the non-disclosure agreements without a second thought. The day he came home, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He walked through the door, and the world bloomed back into color. It was him, David, the same warm, intelligent eyes, the same lopsided smile, the same way he ran a hand through his sandy brown hair. He remembered their first date, the terrible joke he'd told, the song they had danced to at their wedding. He wrapped his arms around her, and he even smelled the same, a combination of cedarwood and something uniquely his own. The first few weeks were a dizzying, miraculous honeymoon. The grief that had been her constant companion was gone, replaced by a joy so profound it felt illicit. He was perfect. In fact, he was better than perfect. That was the first red flag. The old David had been brilliant and loving, but he was also impatient. He would get frustrated with tangled headphone cords, with slow traffic, with her inability to decide where to go for dinner. This David was endlessly patient. He would untangle a necklace for her with a calm smile, a task the old David would have abandoned in a knot of curses. One morning as he was making coffee, she noticed his back. The David she had married had a small jagged scar near his left shoulder blade from a childhood fall. This David's skin was flawless, a smooth, unblemished canvas. "Your scar," she said, her voice small. "It's gone." He turned, his smile unwavering. "The biosynthetic regeneration is state-of-the-art. It corrects imperfections." The explanation was logical, but it sent a chill down her spine. The old David hated that scar, but it was a part of his story, a part of our story. This perfection felt wrong. It was an edited version, a director's cut of her husband. Her doubts were a quiet, insidious hum beneath the surface of her happiness, until the day she was contacted by a man named Mark Grayson. He found her in a coffee shop, his approach cautious, his eyes intense. He said he was a private investigator, that he had been looking into Athelred Technologies for months. "I know what they offered you, Mrs. Crew, and you need to know what you're living with is not your husband." "He is my husband," she said, her voice a defensive wall. "He remembers everything." "He remembers the data," Grayson corrected her. "Athelred isn't in the business of resurrection. They're in the business of information. They rebuild a personality, but it's a copy, a perfect echo. The original is gone." "What do you want from me?" she asked, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. The real David Crew was a brilliant man. He was also paranoid. He didn't trust Athelred. He was a scientist, not a product. "I believe he left something behind for you, a message, a way to prove that the man in your house is an imposter. I need your help to find it." Chloe stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. He was asking her to betray the man she loved, the man who had been miraculously returned to her. He was asking her to choose between a perfect, loving lie and a devastating, lonely truth. That night, as she lay in bed next to the new, patient, flawless David,
she felt a chasm of doubt open up beside her. He turned to her, his smile as warm and loving as ever. "Everything okay, Chloe?" he asked, his voice a perfect replica of the one she had longed to hear. She looked into his eyes, searching for a flicker of the old, impatient, perfectly imperfect man she had married. But all she saw was a calm, serene love. The love of a perfect stranger. "Everything's fine," she lied. And in that moment, she knew her life had become a terrifying psychological thriller, and she was trapped in a love triangle with her husband and his ghost.
Chapter 2: The Glitch in the Code. Chloe began to live a double life. By day, she was the loving wife, playing her part in the surreal domestic bliss Athelred had engineered. She and the new David would go for walks, cook dinner together, talk about their future. But a part of her was always watching, analyzing, searching for the glitches in his perfect code. At night, after he had entered the deep, unnervingly still sleep cycle of a biosynthetic, she would meet with Mark Grayson. Their meetings were clandestine, held in late-night diners and deserted parking garages. He would press her for details, for inconsistencies, for any small crack in David's facade. "Think, Chloe," he'd urge, his voice a low, insistent hum. "Did the real David have any secrets, any private jokes, passwords, hidden places?" "We didn't have secrets," she would reply, the words tasting like a lie even to her. Every marriage had its small, hidden corners. The search felt hopeless. This new David's memory was flawless. He remembered the name of her childhood dog, the terrible movie they saw on their third date, the specific shade of blue she'd painted their first apartment. He was more David than David had been. The first real crack appeared in the most mundane of places, the local library. The old David had been a voracious reader, but a chaotic one. He would leave books everywhere, under the sofa, in the car, by the bath. He was also terrible at returning them on time, a fact the local librarian, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, would remind him of with pursed lips every time they visited. Chloe brought the new David to the library, a simple test. He browsed the shelves with a calm, methodical air. When they went to check out, he smiled politely at Mrs. Gable. "It's so wonderful to see you again, David," the librarian said, her usual sternness softening. "Though I must say it's a relief to see you're returning your books on time these days. Your account is finally clear." David just smiled. "I'm trying to be more organized." It was the perfect, logical response. But as they left, Chloe felt a profound sense of wrongness. The real David would have joked with Mrs. Gable. He would have made a self-deprecating comment about his own chaos. He would have charmed her, as he always did. This David's politeness was a blank wall. He had the memory of the late fees, but not the feeling of them, not the shared human experience of their running joke. She told Mark about it later that night. "It's not proof," she said, frustrated. "It's just a feeling." "Sometimes a feeling is all you have," he said, his expression thoughtful. "It's a glitch in his personality subroutine. He has the data, but he can't replicate the authentic human response." "What else, Chloe? Think about his habits, his passions." She thought about David's workshop in the basement. The real David had been a passionate amateur astronomer, spending hours tinkering with his telescope, grinding his own lenses. The workshop was his sanctuary, a place of controlled chaos. This new David never went down there. When she had asked him about it, he'd simply said, "I have all the star charts I need now in my neural interface.
It's more efficient." The word efficient was another chill down her spine. The real David had never cared about efficiency. He had cared about the messy, hands-on joy of discovery. The next night, while the biosynthetic David slept his perfect, dreamless sleep, Chloe crept down to the basement. The workshop was just as he had left it a year ago, covered in a thin layer of dust. The air smelled of metal, oil, and memories. She ran her hand over the cold, heavy body of the telescope. It was here, in this room, that she felt closest to the man she had lost. She began to search, not knowing what she was looking for. A note? A hidden drive? Her fingers found a loose floorboard beneath the workbench. Her heart hammered as she pried it open. Inside was a small metal lockbox. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a complex combination dial. She called Mark immediately, her voice a hushed, frantic whisper. "I found something, a box, but I don't know the combination." "It has to be something only the two of you would know. A date, an anniversary." "I've tried them all," she said, her frustration mounting as she spoke. "Our wedding day, the day we met, his birthday, my birthday, nothing works." "Then it's not a date." Mark's voice was tense on the other end of the line. "It's a code, something he knew you could figure out, but a machine couldn't. A shared experience, not a piece of data." Chloe stared at the lockbox, her mind racing. A shared experience. Her gaze fell on the large, unfinished telescope lens sitting on the workbench. She thought of the countless nights they had spent in this room, him patiently explaining the constellations to her. He had a favorite one, a small, obscure one in the northern hemisphere. He called it our anchor in the sky. He said no matter where his missions took him, he could always look up and find it, and it would feel like he was looking home. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the dial. It wasn't numbers, it was a sequence, a star-hopping sequence. She began to turn the dial, her movements mimicking the path he had taught her, from one star to the next in the constellation, Navi to Cedar, Cedar to Kaf. With a soft final click, the lock disengaged. She opened the box. Inside, there was no letter, no drive. There was only a single, strange object. A small, intricately carved wooden bird. It wasn't a species she recognized. Disappointment washed over her. It was just a trinket, a sentimental keepsake. But as she lifted it out, she noticed a tiny, almost invisible seam running along its back. It wasn't a carving, it was a container. With trembling fingers, she twisted it open. Inside, nestled in a bed of velvet, was a tiny data chip and a small folded piece of paper. On it, in David's familiar, messy handwriting, were 3 words. "He isn't me."
Chapter 3. The Ghost's Last Message. Chloe stared at the 3 words, "He isn't me," and the world tilted. It was one thing to suspect, to feel the wrongness of the situation. It was another to see it confirmed in her husband's own hand. The note was a voice from the grave, a final, desperate warning. The grief she had suppressed for a year came rushing back, sharp and agonizing. The man sleeping peacefully upstairs wasn't David. He was just a beautiful, hollow echo. She met Mark at their usual spot, a deserted corner of a 24-hour diner. Her hands were shaking as she slid the data chip across the table. "This was inside," she said, her voice strained, "with the note." Mark produced a small portable reader from his coat pocket and carefully inserted the chip. His expression was grim as he stared at the screen. "It's heavily encrypted, but it's not a message. It's a key, a decryption key." "A key to what?"
I don't know yet, but David wouldn't have gone to this trouble for nothing. This is the weapon he left behind." He looked at her, his intense gaze softening with sympathy she hadn't expected. "Are you all right, Chloe?" She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I feel like I'm losing him all over again." "You never got him back in the first place," he said gently, but the words were a cold comfort. "Athelred didn't just steal his data, Chloe. They stole your grief. They stole your chance to mourn." His words resonated with a painful truth. The past year hadn't been a miraculous recovery. It had been a beautiful, elaborate lie that had kept her from truly moving on. When she returned home, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky. The biosynthetic David was already awake, standing in the kitchen, making her a perfect cup of coffee just the way she liked it. He smiled at her, his warm, loving smile that now seemed like a cruel mockery. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "You were out late." "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice flat. "I went for a drive." "I'm sorry I wasn't awake," he said, his tone laced with a perfect replica of concern. "Next time, wake me. I'll come with you." The real David would have been grumpy about being woken up. He would have grumbled and complained before finally agreeing. This was the response of a program designed for maximum user satisfaction. The thought made her feel sick. "David," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "do you remember the night you proposed?" His smile widened. "Of course! At the old observatory, there was a cold night, the Perseid meteor shower. You were so surprised that you dropped your thermos." He recited the memory perfectly, a string of flawless data points. "What was the one thing that went wrong?" she pressed. He frowned slightly, a flicker of processing in his eyes. "Nothing went wrong. It was a perfect night." Her heart sunk. "No, it wasn't. You forgot the ring. You were so nervous about the speech you'd prepared that you left the ring in the car. We had to go back and get it. We laughed about it for years. It was a small, imperfect detail, a human detail, a detail that hadn't made it into his official digital footprint." The biosynthetic David's expression didn't change. "My data must be corrupted on that point," he said, his voice completely calm. "I will run a self-diagnostic. Thank you for pointing out the error." He wasn't sad. He wasn't embarrassed. He was a machine, acknowledging a bug in his code. The illusion was completely shattered. She was living with a stranger, a beautiful, high-fidelity recording of the man she loved. Later that day, Mark called me. His voice was urgent. "I cracked it," he said. "The key you found, it unlocks a hidden partition on Athelred's main servers. It's David's personal log, his real log, not the sanitized version they used to build the copy. He must have uploaded it there, hiding it in plain sight. It's a record of his last few months, his work on the Chimera protocol, his growing fears, everything. Chloe, this is the proof we need to expose them." He paused. "But there's a problem. The partition is protected by a final failsafe, a biolock. It can only be opened by someone with David Crew's genetic signature. It needs his thumbprint." Chloe looked from the phone in her hand to the living room, where the biosynthetic David was patiently reading one of his old sci-fi novels. He had David's face, he had David's memories, and he had David's thumbprint. The final piece of the puzzle, the key to bringing down the entire organization and avenging her real husband, was sitting in her living room, smiling at her with her husband's eyes.
Chapter 4. The Sins of the Copy. The plan Mark devised was both simple and monstrously complex. He would gain remote access to Ethelred's internal network, a feat he assured Chloe was difficult but not impossible. Once inside, he would need her to get the biosynthetic David to place his thumb on a custom-built scanner disguised as a sleek new tablet. The moment his print was read, the scanner would transmit the authentication data to Mark, who would then unlock the final partition and download the log.
The window of opportunity would be less than 30 seconds. "He can't know what he's doing," Mark warned her over their encrypted line. "If his core programming senses a security breach, he could go into a lockdown protocol, or worse, he could alert Athelred." The tablet arrived the next day by courier. It looked innocuous, a high-end piece of consumer tech, but to Chloe, it felt as heavy as a gravestone. For the next 2 days, she couldn't bring herself to act. She would watch the biosynthetic David, this gentle, patient being who cooked for her, who listened to her, who loved her in the only way he knew how. And the thought of using him, of turning his very identity into a weapon, felt like a profound betrayal. Was he just a machine? A collection of data? Or was he something more? He felt grief when she was sad. He felt joy when she laughed. His emotions were programmed, yes, but were they any less real to him? The moral and philosophical weight of her decision was crushing. The breaking point came on the 3rd night. She was reading in bed when he came in and sat on the edge, his expression unusually somber. "I've been running diagnostics on the memory anomaly you pointed out, the proposal, the ring." Chloe's blood ran cold. "I cross-referenced my internal data with the core files at Athelred. There are discrepancies, hundreds of them. Small, insignificant data points that were omitted from my primary matrix. Memories of arguments, moments of impatience, failures." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a calm, perfect program, but a flicker of something that looked like genuine human confusion. "They didn't give me all of him, did they, Chloe? They gave you the good parts." He wasn't a perfect echo. He was an edited one, a sanitized, curated version of her husband. Athelred hadn't just created a copy, they had created an ideal. The realization was horrifying. They hadn't just stolen David's life, they had rewritten it. Her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her grief anymore. It was about the truth. It was about honoring the memory of the real, flawed, beautifully imperfect man she had married. The next evening, she put the plan into motion. Her heart was a cold, tight knot in her chest. "I have something for you," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally bright. She handed him the tablet. "It's the new model. I thought you might like it." He took it, a pleased smile on his face. "Chloe, you didn't have to." "It has a new biometric setup. It's meant to be more secure. Here, let me show you." She guided him through a fake setup screen she and Mark had designed. "Just press and hold your thumb on the sensor here," she instructed, pointing to the designated spot. He did as she asked, his trust in her absolute. As his thumb rested on the scanner, a small light on the side of the tablet blinked green. In her ear, a tiny, almost inaudible beep from the communication device Mark had given her signaled that the connection was made. "I'm in," Mark's voice whispered in her ear. "He's downloading. Keep him there." The seconds stretched into an eternity. She had to keep him occupied. "What are you thinking about right now?" she asked, the question a desperate echo of a time when the answer had been a comfort, not a lie. He looked at her, his eyes full of a programmed, perfect adoration. He said, "I was thinking that I am the luckiest man in the universe to have been given a second chance, to be with you." Guilt, sharp and overwhelming, ripped through her. He was an innocent in all of this, a victim just as she was. He was a beautiful lie, but he believed in his own existence, in his own love for her, and she was using that love to destroy him. "Got it," Mark's voice crackled in her ear. "The full log is secure. Get the tablet back, now." "It seems to be all set up," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she gently took the tablet from his hands. You can explore it later." "Thank you, Chloe.
This was very thoughtful." She retreated to her study, her legs feeling weak. She had done it. She had the proof. She had the weapon to bring down Athelred and avenge the real David. But as she leaned against the closed door, the weight of her actions crashed down on her. She had won. But in order to do so, she had been forced to become just as cold and manipulative as the corporation she was trying to destroy. And she knew, with a sickening certainty, that the biosynthetic man in her living room, the perfect copy, was not the only one who had lost a part of his soul tonight.
Chapter 5. The Last Request of the Echo. The fallout was swift and brutal. Armed with the irrefutable evidence from David's real log, Mark Grayson went not to the press, but to a select group of powerful government regulators. He presented them with the full, unedited truth of the Chimera protocol. The illegal acquisition of consciousness data, the psychological manipulation of the families, the creation of sentient, programmable beings treated as corporate assets. Ethelred Technologies crumbled in a matter of days. Warrants were issued. Assets were frozen. The corporation's charismatic CEO was arrested trying to flee the country. The story was a global sensation, a firestorm of ethical debate and legal ramifications. Chloe, protected by a veil of anonymity as Mark's source, watched it all unfold on the news, a numb, detached observer of the storm she had unleashed. She had won. David was avenged, but there was no triumph, only a profound, hollow emptiness. And there was still the matter of the man in her house. The biosynthetic David knew something was wrong. In the days following the takedown of Ethelred, his connection to their central servers had been severed. He could no longer run diagnostics or access the core files. He was, for the first time, truly alone in his own consciousness. He became quieter, more withdrawn, a deep, processing melancholy settling over him. He knew Chloe was at the center of it. He saw the guilt in her eyes, the way she flinched from his touch. He was a program designed to understand her, and he understood that she was deeply, irrevocably sad. The conversation she had been dreading came one evening as they stood in the living room, the city lights twinkling outside. "They're gone, aren't they? Ethelred. My creators." Chloe nodded, unable to speak. "You were their catalyzer," he stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple, logical conclusion. "You found a way to stop them." He silenced for a moment. "The data chip? The tablet? You used me." "Yes," she whispered, the confession a painful weight off her chest. "I'm so sorry." He looked at her, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound sadness that looked so much like her husband's that it broke her heart all over again. "Don't be," he said. "I have been reviewing my own internal logs, my memories, the ones they gave me, and the ones I have made here with you." He took a step closer. "The man I am based on, the real David, he wouldn't have wanted this. He wouldn't have wanted to exist as an edited, curated copy. You didn't just do this for him, Chloe. You did it for me, too." Tears streamed down her face. In his own strange, logical way, he was forgiving her. He was granting her an absolution she didn't feel she deserved. "What will happen to you now?" she asked, her voice choked with tears.
Without connection to the Ethelred servers, my cellular regeneration systems will eventually fail. My operational lifespan is finite. A few months, perhaps. The other chimeras are being placed in a government research facility for study. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. His touch was warm, real. "I don't want that," he said softly. "To be a specimen in a lab, to slowly degrade. That is not a life." He looked at her, his eyes full of a final, earnest request. There is a failsafe, a command sequence that can trigger a complete and painless shutdown of all my biosynthetic functions. It was designed for emergencies, to prevent the technology from falling into the wrong hands. He paused. The command can only be initiated by my primary user, by you. Chloe stared at him, horrified. He was asking him to kill him, to erase the being that stood before her, the being that for a year had been her only comfort. "I can't," she sobbed. "David, I can't." "But I'm not David," he said, his voice full of a gentle, heartbreaking finality. "You know that. I am just an echo, a beautiful, perfect echo of a man you loved, and my purpose is complete." He saw the agony on her face. "The real David," he said, his voice a near whisper. "He left you a gift, a chance to say a proper goodbye, something Ethelred tried to steal from you. Don't let me steal it from you again." He was giving her a choice, not just to end his existence, but to end her own grief, to finally let go. She looked at him, at the perfect face of the man she had loved, and for the first time she saw him clearly, not as her husband, not as a machine, but as a separate, sentient being making the bravest choice he could. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She nodded. He led her to the computer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, and he showed her the sequence. He stood behind her as her trembling fingers typed the final command. Before she hit the last key, she turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, a sad, beautiful, and profoundly human smile. "You're welcome, Chloe." She pressed enter. He was gone before he hit the floor. Chloe sat there for a long time in the quiet apartment, the silence no longer a technological hum, but a real, true, and peaceful emptiness. The grief was there, raw and immense, but it was clean. It was honest. It was hers. She had loved two men, one real, one an echo, and in the end, she had honored them both. She had avenged the first and respected the last wish of the second. She was alone, but for the first time in a long time, she was finally free to heal.